Hi, I'm Rowan Anglicas. Welcome to Strata Today. We're with Dale Heinken here from AVT, and we're going to spend some time talking to him about leadership and managing teams. So welcome, Dale.
Well, welcome to you as well to our facility here in Melbourne. Really glad to have you guys here and being able to participate in this opportunity.
Fantastic. Well, let's firstly start. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm the president and managing director of AVT Australia. We manufacture, develop, and design gyro-stabilized camera systems for uncrewed vehicles. Drones is also what they're commonly called for here in Melbourne, Victoria. And prior to joining AVT, I was in the military for 26 years of commissioned service, retired in June of 21 as a captain, leaving Major Command there. And prior to that, I spent 4 years at the Naval Academy. So you could say I spent 30 years in the military. Really, a good portion of my life was all within the military. And then within the military, I was a surface warfare officer, so I spent quite a bit of time on ships. I had a specialty in nuclear powered propulsion. So it also meant I spent some time on aircraft carriers, overseeing the operation of the reactors. So I've served on cruisers, destroyers, littoral combat ships, aircraft carriers, LHD or amphibious aircraft carriers. I've also spent some time at the Naval Academy teaching seamanship and navigation, some time at the Pentagon, working on the national military strategy, national security strategy, global risk assessments, climate change, energy security. And so I had a pretty varied career throughout my time in the military, and glad to be here in this next phase of my life.
I can imagine actually this interview could go for hours. We could a lot of topics we could
turn it up.
Yeah. But no, thank you, and I really appreciate you joining us today. I'd like to touch on, we're going to talk about a little bit about the military and then the corporate life as well. How's the transition been from your time in the military, then moving now into AVT in the corporate workplace?
It actually hasn't been too bad. I mean, it is different in the military. You wear your career on your uniform, on your person. When you enter a room, they see what rank you are. They see, based upon the ribbons you have, what you've done and experience throughout your military time, and then even your warfare insignia. They know what you do. So there's a lot of, they see you, they immediately form first impressions. Going into the commercial world or the corporate world, it's not quite the case. People are kind of evaluating you, judging you, and I think it's important for anybody that's transitioning from the military to understand really what are the stereotypes that exist about military people, because it is different than the corporate world. And some of the stereotypes and understanding them and how you can either leverage those stereotypes or maybe not leverage the ones that are negative stereotypes. So when you think of somebody in the military, you think of somebody that's proud to serve their country, patriotic, it would be a good word for it. They're hardworking. They're accustomed to being put in ambiguous situations as far as moving around. Most tours are only 2 to 3 years, and then you move along to a different location. Self-sacrifice, you would think about as well. High priority on fitness and general health. But there's also some negatives that come with what people perceive the military being, and that would be that you're rigid. You're very rank conscious, like you need a pyramid hierarchy within the organization. You can be autocratic because you're accustomed to people following your orders, and that you might not be able to think outside the box, or you need somebody to tell you what to do or to follow procedures. And you need to understand those stereotypes when you transition from the military to the commercial sector, is that's what people form, because some of them don't have military service. They only know what they've seen, observed, or been told, and understanding that those are the things you're going to encounter and necessarily how they could play to your strengths, and then also maybe even emphasize some of your weaknesses. When I first started transitioning from the corporate world, and I was quite fortunate, I was asked questions like, well, you've been really successful in the military, but we don't know if you're going to be successful in the corporate world. You got to prove yourself first. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky that probably a few months before I was transitioning out, I was reading an article in Proceedings magazine, which is more of an industry magazine for the maritime services in the U.S., produced by the U.S. Naval Institute. And there was this professional notes section that was written by an officer. And it was one of those transitioning from the military titles. And I started reading it, and as I started reading, I'm like, yeah, this guy's talking about me. He was writing about me. It was like I was a surface warfare officer. I had major command. I was an captain in 06. I had 2 master's degrees. I'm like, this guy's talking about me. Yes, this is so great. I can't wait to hear about how great it was from the transition out. And then he goes, and it meant absolutely nothing in the commercial world. They didn't know, or they appreciated. They said, thank you for your service, but they were looking for credentials and certifications. So one of the things that they strongly recommended was they go out and get the professional military, or not professional, excuse me, the project management professional certification. And said, those acronyms mean something in the commercial world. So I started thinking about that and like, wow, I really need to kind of put my best leg forward. And so I started looking at the Navy what had a program called Navy Cool that was particularly advantageous for me. And they'll pay for you to do certification exams up to and sometimes the training for those. And so I researched it and looked at it and said, hey, I want to get this project manager professional. A lot of things that we do in the military is project management. You're orchestrating either operations, overseeing maintenance activities. And so a lot of that experience had been leveraged toward the certification. So I was able to get Navy Cool to pay for the exam. And some of these exams are $500 to $2,000. Yeah. And it was covered by that. And so I was able to go through and I picked about 4 heavy hitting certifications again to just add some credentials to me and made that transition into the civilian world. And I wouldn't necessarily say those certifications helped me land a job because I was quite fortunate that some opportunities presented themselves to me based upon my performance in the military. But they definitely added credibility to me as I came into these organizations at the fairly senior levels.
Yeah, I think it's important to forward plan your exit out, and that's what you're talking about there. It's thinking ahead and looking at what do you need to do for that transition and those certifications that will help you, may not necessarily land the job, but it provides a different uh, learning that you can then utilize in the corporate world as well. Maybe it's a language change and things like that as well.
Yeah, it's really important. I've had some mentors throughout my career that always says, at some point your military life your military career will end, and you need to transition or start thinking about the next phase of your life. And it was, very, I would say, not earth-shattering, advice, but very valid advice to say, hey, really start thinking about the next phase. So you hear people talk about their 3, 5, 10-year plans. You really got to start thinking about what it is, and it's hard sometimes because you love your job. I loved my job. I was literally at the top of my game. Had major command of an LHD, an aircraft, amphibious aircraft carrier. I had thousands of sailors working for me, and it was a great crew, and we were achieving all the excellence certifications, awards, recognition that we needed to. And it was the top of my career, and trying to leave that is a hard thing to do, but as wise people say, you always want to leave when you're on top and not when you're being forced out. And so, it was hard to leave when you're on top, but it was the right time to transition out and really start this next phase.
Yeah. And what was it like, commanding a vessel of up to say 3,000 people at any one time?
Yeah, it's challenging. It's also very rewarding. I think anytime you have something extremely challenging, the reward is proportionally even better when it's a challenging environment. And I had worked my way up from command of a crew of about 95, 96 sailors to being in charge of a reactor department on an aircraft carrier where I had 450 sailors working for me. And then I worked up to 1,200 sailors, and then the additional 2,000 Marines that would come on and work for the Marine Corps, and that relationship that creates an interesting dynamic itself. But a lot of things that you practice on those smaller units, the smaller, still work at the bigger ones. It just takes more time. When you look at the layers of the organization, and here you're at the top, and everybody's looking at you, and how much of that layers can you influence as the top person? There's 3 things they say is always evaluates your employees' engagement or affects your employees' engagement. One is their immediate supervisor. The second thing is trust in their senior leadership. And then the third part is, belief in the organization or the purpose of the organization. So that was kind of hard to swallow, that I could be the best leader in the world, but if I'm not training or developing or watching out for those immediate supervisors, all that good work, all that great leadership really doesn't influence people's engagement on a day-to-day. And so getting out, interacting with people, really keeping a pulse, you're taking your pulse points throughout the command to see how are we doing, because it's just too big to monitor everybody. And in any given day, you're going to meet somebody potentially new at your command that you've never met before, because there's just a lot of people to get there. And so when you want to change culture, you want to change behaviors, it's a slower process. You got to start with that layer down beneath you, and then work the layer down beneath that one, and then work that layer down. And it just takes time, but you can. And I was quite pleased with how my last command did. We were able to get that. And it took about a year, almost 2 years, to make that transition, that change. But eventually, again, it happened. And it was so rewarding to watch that many people all kind of moving in the same direction and being successful and being happy where they are. Can't guarantee everybody was happy because that many people, there's bound to be a few that are not, but for the most part, everybody was happy, and it was really rewarding to do that. Um, so yeah, it was great. When I look back on my military career, that was a highlight because it was a challenge, and using some simple, leadership principles that I learned at the smaller units and apply them on a larger scale and just understand that patience and the right course of action really paid off, and you can see that happen. And so that really leaves you with, wow, I contributed, or at least I contributed to the next generation of leaders. And I've had people reach out to me since and like, hey, thank you for that training and stuff. I use it at my new command or not. And that's all you can ask. That's really what legacy is about, is prepping that new generation to assume the role that you will.
Yeah, you can really hear the pride in your voice and the way you talk about your time there. It's really fantastic. And you touched on leadership quite a number of times during that. And one of the things I'm really interested in is you learn quite a number of leadership attributes and how to utilize them in high stress environments. When you're leading a team in that industry, there is going to be extremely high stress environments. What are some of the leadership attributes that you learned during that time you've now brought into AVT in your current corporate workplace?
Yeah, I think, by far the most important was maintaining a level head. There's when you're in a high stress environment, people have a tendency to start jumping to conclusions, or they start wanting to do things, or overreacting. And I think as a leader or any individual, when you're in a high stress situations, you got to take that deep breath and go, all right, what's the information telling me? And this is where the nuclear training comes in important, is because they always teach you is don't ever believe one indication, always look for two or more. Two indications will tell you if something's going wrong or not. But if one's not enough to base on, so you always go, okay, what's the information? Tell me, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? And, appeal to all the senses. What am I tasting, hearing, smelling, and everything else, and evaluate what is actually happening. But you have to take that deep breath, and then realize that most decisions don't require an immediate response. Some do, but not all of them do. Most of them, I'd say probably by far the majority of them, you have time to consult a variety of groups, your trusted counsel, those that are going to give you different opinions, so you can weigh it all. And you start those conversations with, like, I value your opinion. I might not go with what your recommendation is, but I value it, and I need to take that in consideration. At the end of the day, I'll make the best decision for what I considered for all concerned. So that's kind of the slow way to do it. You got time to think about it. You got time to consult people. You got time to get a diversity of opinions and then make the best decision based on effort. But then there's those ones you have to make immediate decisions. Those are the hardest ones. And I can tell you about situations, and I'll share one with you, where every fiber in your being is yelling for you to take action on something, and you got to calm it down and be level headed, because as the leader of the organization, everybody looks at you and how you respond, and whatever you do, they amplify. It's like they're the what the little horns, the yelling, the amplifiers,
Yep.
the bullhorns. Whatever you do, they become the bullhorn, and it gets amplified. It may actually make the situation worse. So one of the things that we do in the Navy, and one of the things I always thought was one of the more dangerous evolutions, even though it was safe, when you compare it to flight operations and some of the other things we do, you don't have moving blades and choppers. Sometimes you do, but it was the underway replenishment at sea, where you take ships that, we got the vast ocean, we put them together, sometimes 140, 150 feet away from each other, and then you transfer fuel, food, whatever goods that you have. And so we were doing this underway replenishment in the Indian Ocean, and it was the monsoon season, and the seas were rough, probably 10 to 13 foot, probably 40 knots of wind, 35 to 40 knots of wind, pretty much on the edge of where it was going to be a challenge. It was going to be a sporty evolution. So what you do is you get two ships and you pull one. This one makes an approach here, and this is where fluid dynamics becomes incredibly important. Bernoulli's equation. So as you bring these two ships together, you start compressing that water between them. And so that water, so that it wants to stay with its friends around it, speeds up. And anytime you speed up a fluid running it through a compressed area, the pressure goes down. So these ships are coming alongside, and what they want to do is and the closer you get, the more that force gets, and they want to come in and they want to touch each other. But you don't want that to happen, because that usually means damage, or people get hurt, or worst case scenario, people die. So you don't want that to happen, but you're trying to balance this, because also off that bow, you have a high pressure. So sometimes it's like you're getting two balls and trying to balance them on each other to maintain that position. Because if you even go 10 feet forward, 10 feet aft, you can really mess up the alignment and cause your fueling pros to come unseated. So that's a challenging situation like it is, particularly when you got sporty weather. Well, in this case, we had another ship that came alongside the other side. So now you've got two ships interacting, well, three ships total interacting together, and you're trying to maintain your position here. And this is a 42,000 ton ship. It's not the most nimble ship out there. So you get this LHD that I'm on, and I'm driving it, and I've got the oiler, and then the ship comes alongside, and they lose one of their shafts. So it starts drifting more towards this one, and you can tell that the oiler all of a sudden start focusing on their attention because they start closing us, and we're getting to 120 feet, and you see this happening, and it's happening quick because as that ships get closer, that suction force gets even greater, and you're just like every fiber in your being is screaming out, left full rudder, let's get away from this ship, let's do that. But you can't do that because what happens is your pivot on the ship, you swing your sterns into each other, and you actually cause a collision by overreacting in that case. So in those situations, you see this closing quick, you just go rudder midships because you actually have to, because of those interaction forces, you actually have to steer a little bit to the right of that to maintain that force against that bubble. So you go rudder midships, and you're like, boy, I hope this really. And you got to keep in mind, if you don't have a calm voice when this is happening, that helmsman might all of a sudden, oh my gosh, something's bad about it, and do that action, which all of a sudden swings your stern into it. So you just got to be calm. And then you go, all right, rudder midships. All right, let that kind of give it a cut. Okay, left 1 degree rudder. Okay, left 2 degrees. And you start walking it out. And then we did. And then after you get done with it, you're like, oh, that was a situation. But you always hot wash those situations. So after we got done doing that, we pulled everybody up there. And one of the boatswains comes up and goes, I was looking down. He was on the elevator, and he's like, I was looking down. I could see on top of that ship. He goes. I thought we were getting a little close. I'm like, yeah, it was one of our more sportier evolutions. But everything happened, and a lot of people were actually didn't realize that we had gotten so close because did it in a controlled method, and that's the most critical thing I think as a leader is whether it's you have to make an immediate decision or you can make a little bit longer decision or go through the decision process a little bit longer. You have to stay calm and level-headed and look at what information is being presented to you, and then react appropriately. And that you can't overreact it because that will perpetuate throughout your entire organization.
Yeah, it's really interesting you talk about your emotion and how it can then be projected, down the line, and how that can be magnified. And if your voice is not showing calm, then the next will be worse and worse. And then once we get to to the bottom there, and the people that are critical to the task, it can be 10 times the level of angst or frustration or concern than what you're putting forward. So it's really interesting, that element. And but my question here as well is around, I want to understand the linkage between the military and really what you've spoken about just then, and then the corporate workplace, and being able to, in the corporate workplace, support your team to manage and deliver outcomes during high stress environments. So you sort of touched on that from a military sense. Really interested to hear from a corporate lens how you're using that skill set now to deliver during those times.
Yeah, and honestly, they're the same skill sets in some cases. I mean, in the corporate world, you're usually not making life or death decisions, immediately where you have to respond or there's going to be serious, maybe millions of dollars in damage or life loss. We don't really have those very high risk, evolutions that we occurring there, but you still have to make high risk decisions. Is this going to be a success or is it going to be a flop? I think it's the same process. You look at it and I call it the engineering approach. All right, here's all the symptoms. Here's the potential causes of this. Here's the assumptions we make on it, and then let's disprove all those assumptions or those potential causes, and you work through it. And it's the same thing whether it's a problem you're dealing with because you got a customer call and say, hey, something's broken, something's not working right. All right, what's the symptoms? Okay, what could potentially be causing it? And let's find the root cause analysis. Let's do the root cause analysis on it, find the root cause, what's going on. Then we can give you the correct solution. Let's not just try to patchwork things and address the symptoms. Let's truly find out what the problem is. But then even the same thing as far as you look at that, okay, so maybe you got an aggressive timeline on a delivery. Let's look at the timeline. Okay, what's feasible? Okay, that's how we normally do business, but can we think a little outside the box? Can we call in a consultant or an additional temporary support. Maybe we shift to different working hours so that we have part of the crew coming on because we're limited by equipment. Maybe some of the crew comes in the morning and the other part comes in the afternoon so that we can all utilize that equipment and we work through that. So I think it's about, let's look at the problem. Let's look at the timeline and see if we have time to make a decision on this. And then what is it that we have to deliver on? Let's look at what resources require. And then at the end of the day, if you do all that stuff and you can't meet the timeline, then you've got to raise your hand and say, Uncle, I can't meet the timeline. Here's what it's going to cost if it does. And be honest with people. And so far, I found that that works very well, both in the military as well as the commercial world. But at the end of the day, if that's not acceptable, you can't change physics. You can't do time travel. It has to be, and you can't really, put blood into it and make things happen miraculously.
Oh, fantastic! No, fantastic to talk to you about your history all the way through and how you're utilising that in the corporate world. I think it's absolutely fascinating. As I said at the start, I think we could spend hours here actually talking to you about your journey and history. But I really appreciate your time.